Saturday. It's March 15th, 2025, and you're listening to Morning Meeting. I'm Ashley Baker in London.
I'm Michael Haney in New York City.
And we are here to bring you good news from the universe of airmail. But first, the news. Well, Michael, in the U.S., our political whiplash continues. On Thursday, a federal judge has ordered 6 federal agencies to reinstate thousands of employees who were fired last month on a directive from Elon Musk's Doge. Meanwhile, Trump is threatening a 200% tariff on European champagne, wine, and alcoholic beverages. This is dreadfully unfair. Also, a retaliation for the EU's 50% tax on American whiskey. Now is the moment to remind us all that that itself was a response to the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum that Trump imposed on them. I am not sure how we are supposed to keep track of all of this or how we can even stomach it if we are denied our supply of Gavi to Gavi. But alas, airmail is here to provide some very necessary escapism.
It sure is. But first, if you feel things couldn't possibly get worse, well, you might want to duck and cover. Our correspondent, John Von Southern, has the incredible and wild story of how the U.S. Air Force dropped a nuclear bomb off the coast of Savannah, Georgia in 1958. And it's still there. Then, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York was once the epitome of a great hotel until the Chinese Communist Party bought it and spent the last 8 years renovating it. What could go wrong? Our writer Ben Ryder-Howe reports. And finally, Christine Mulkey has her report on a development of a different nature in New York City, the arrival in Lower Manhattan of an outpost of one of France's most influential department stores. Can it make shopping fun again? Christine is going to tell us all about it. So, Ashley, where would you like to go?
Michael, let's start with our favorite nuclear disaster. John Von Southern has uncovered a fascinating truth. He is a Paris-based writer and the author of Monsieur Mediocre. Welcome, John.
Let's do it.
Okay, so John, your story takes us back to the 1950s, a time when Russia was unequivocally our enemy and the Cold War was in full swing. Tell us about that moment.
We're in the late 50s, Cold War hysteria, and the military, the vanguard of the military at the time is something called SAC, which is Strategic Air Command. And it's run by a guy named Curtis LeMay, who some say was one of the inspiration for one of the characters in Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. Curtis LeMay is convinced that we're under imminent attack by the Russians. And for that reason, he institutes a policy called Operation Chrome Dome, whereas we must have at least 20 bombers in the air at all times with nuclear weapons aboard, able to go to Russia and bomb them on short notice. So that's the kind of historical context we're in at this point. Also understand that nuclear bombs, we do not have the capability to shoot them by missiles at this time. So if you want to drop a bomb or if you want to attack somebody with a nuclear bomb, you need to take it by plane. Hence why the Air Force is kind of the vanguard of the military at the time.
Your reporting in this piece just shocked me on so many different levels. I mean, I had no idea that the United States had these armed aircraft that were flying all over, ready to, Dr. Strangelove, the Soviet Union at a moment's notice. But, as you unveiled this incredible story of this bomb that is languishing off the coast of Georgia, you really reveal how these accidents were kind of, if not commonplace, certainly not unusual. So take us to the story of this Tybee Island bomb and exactly how it ended up on the ocean floor.
I'd always been kind of intrigued by Savannah, going back to why this story kind of resonated with me. I always loved, the idea that Savannah is considered, one of the most haunted cities or the most haunted city in the US. And then it kind of came across my desk, a person who lived in Savannah was like, have you ever heard about the bomb? And I'm like, what do you mean the bomb? And she told me the story and it sounded nuts. I was like, well, this is the biggest ghost story of them all. That there's a languishing nuclear bomb sitting 10 miles from Savannah in the Sound right off of Tybee Island. And how did it get there? I mean, that was kind of, my piece is kind of twofold. It was kind of both historical. How is it possible that you can lose a nuclear bomb? And how is it possible you can't find it, considering technology that exists today? And that kind of led into the investigative part of the piece of like, well, why haven't they gone and gotten it? And what are the risks of it still being there? And that kind of opened up a whole can of worms that led to the second part of the piece. So we're in 1958. And what we said, there's a kind of, policy going on with bombs in the air at all times to go to Russia on a moment's notice. And that even included planes on training missions. And so we're on a training mission led by a guy named Major Howard Richardson, who takes off in his B-47 with a bomb aboard and a crew, and they are going to simulate an attack on Russia. So they fly all the way up to the Great Lakes, and during which time they kind of avoid different fighter jets that come at them over the Mississippi and elsewhere, and they do a simulated bomb drop, kind of near Duluth, I think, and they assume the mission is over, and they're coming down the east coast of the U.S. on their way back to Florida. And unbeknownst to Richardson and his crew, they're attacked again in a simulated attack by a couple fighter jets right over South Carolina. And one of the jets collides with Richardson's plane. His plane is falling apart. They're yelling, "Mayday, Mayday." They need to land as soon as possible. He has a bomb aboard. He's got his crew aboard, and he radios into Hunter Airfield, which is right near Savannah. And they say, "You're not landing here." He's like, "What are you talking about? My plane is disintegrating." And they're like, "You can't land." So he said, "What do I do with the bomb?" And so he doubles over Wassaw Sound and ditches the nuclear bomb. It doesn't go off. He lands the plane, receives a distinguished honor for saving the plane and saving his crew. And immediately a search for the bomb in the Sound is initiated. And it lasts 6 weeks. And during that time, I talked with locals who were kids at the time, and they remembered, a flotilla of boats and planes and frogmen and scanners, everything in trying to find this bomb. And after 6 weeks, they stopped. And I asked the guy, I said, "Well, why did they stop the search?" And he said, "Well, they dropped another bomb in South Carolina. I had to go look for that." So that's kind of what we were dealing with at the time. There was an incident in Greenland in the late 50s. There was an incident in Spain where they lost 2 bombs. So these things were happening more and more during Operation Chrome Dome, which eventually got shut down because it was too dangerous. But I digress.
I mean, John, were these bombs armed? Like, what do we know about them? And was there any concern at the time that there could be leakage? They could be damaging levels of radiation. Like, what did we know at that time about environmental exposure versus what we know now?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, for a long time after the bomb was considered irretrievably lost, that's the way the Defense Department called it, it was assumed that the bomb was not didn't have a nuclear capsule in it, meaning like it didn't have the plutonium and the uranium both inside the bomb to make it a nuclear bomb, to give it a capacity to explode in a nuclear way. But Airmail obtained an old declassified military memo, which was written in 1966 and became declassified in the late 90s. And it was written by a guy named W.F. Howard, who at the time was Assistant Secretary of Defense. I mean, this is a guy that was pretty high up in the ranks. They were doing an inventory of lost bombs, and he was reporting to the Committee of Atomic Energy at the time. And Howard just says, "Oh, yeah, no, the Tybee bomb, although it's lost, it was a complete bomb." And a complete meaning that it did have the nuclear capsule aboard, which changes the whole landscape of this. That means that the actual bomb does have plutonium, does have uranium, and is capable of exploding. And up until now, they didn't say that. So now you have a complete bomb, and the risks of it just sitting there are enormous. I spoke with an expert who's writing a book about this. He said, also which has to be taken into consideration is this bomb, when it was dropped, it was probably damaged. And this bomb was made of forged aluminum. It wasn't in steel. So it's kind of fragile. And with salt water, that stuff kind of erodes. So there's a real chance, when I spoke to a lot of nuclear experts, professors and people that work at Sandia, that, there is a big possibility that this could be leaking.
Well, John, I mean, why isn't there more outrage about this? I mean, given what we know now about environmental toxins, it seems to me that there would be a battle cry to get this thing fixed. I mean, do you think that it's because over the years there have been several attempts to locate it and they've all kind of sputtered out, and it's one of those things that's just sitting in plain sight for so long that the danger becomes eroded?
Yeah, I think there is something to that. I think time has played a thing. It's been so long now sitting in the Sound that the people that knew about it when it first happened are mostly dead. It was writing this piece, it was difficult to find people who were eyewitnesses during the time, and it was weird. It was after the initial search, kind of 40 years passed, and then it was kind of brought to the surface again by a guy named Derek Duke, who was a retired military guy who was writing a book about lost nukes, different broken arrow events in the U.S. And he realized that they had never found the Tybee bomb. He was a Georgia resident himself, and he offered to go look for it. And it was because of Duke's involvement He ran a salvage company, and he started kind of trolling the sound, looking for the bomb, and in doing so, kind of, generated some local support politically and economically. And that's when the outrage kind of came. Because all of a sudden, residents of Tybee Island and local residents of Savannah were like, we didn't even know there was a bomb in the water. We didn't know it was a complete bomb. When did this happen? And so, yes, outrage did start to kind of brew. There were local city hall meetings. There was even cases of people bringing deformed crabs to the meetings and mutated mullets. Duke himself said that radiation levels were higher than normal in some of the samples that he took. And that pushed the Air Force finally to do a complete report and investigation back in 2001 to see what to do about this bomb.
Well, John, we're living in this bizarre moment now where Trump is, opening up the Atlantic shelf for oil exploration, and there's a lot of development happening in Savannah. Like, how are those two factors impacting this conversation?
Yeah, well, following the report from the Air Force, there was an extensive report. The gist of the report at the end was basically, let's let sleeping dogs lie. The bomb is more dangerous if we try to get it than if we just leave it be. The economic impact, some say, would be enormous if you actually tried to retrieve the bomb. You would have to maybe shut down parts of Savannah. Maybe a Chernobyl-type sarcophage would have to be constructed around the bomb before you even tried to access it. And so the report was basically like, it hasn't hurt anybody yet. It would be dangerous to get it, so let's let it go. But that doesn't take into consideration the present dangers that are going on with Savannah, like you said, who's going through a boom time period right now. And there's three things that are going on. Savannah wants to enlarge in their port. The Hyundai plant just got built there. It's a $5 billion plant. They need bigger container ships to come into this port. And for that, they need to dredge. And dredging means creating a bigger channel, and you're digging up a lot of silt right where that bomb might be. The second is oil exploration that you brought it up. Right before he left office, President Biden, in an executive order, protected 625 million acres of Atlantic Ocean waters from oil exploration. Trump recently said that I will unban it. I have an executive order and I will just unban it. And they've always said that they're interested in oil exploration on the Atlantic coast. Oil exploration involves this thing called seismic surveys, where they kind of pump compressed air into the ground to try to find oil deposits. But the result is that the ocean bed is shaken up enormously. And there's a lot of old munitions sitting at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, including the Tybee bomb. And local authorities is like, that's the last thing you should be doing, considering what might be on the ocean floor. So yeah, so you have maybe a defective bomb that's leaking. You have dredging that might be going on. You have seismic surveys that might be going on. And, it could be a cocktail for a disaster. And on top of everything, and this is where it gets really scary as a ghost story, is that the bomb is sitting on the Florida aquifer. And the Florida aquifer is the biggest source of drinking water for the southeast part of the U.S. So, the stakes are high.
Well, John, what a ghost story. I can't wait to see the film version of this. No doubt. It's going to be on a big screen very soon.
We can only hope, right?
Well, on that note, Michael, we have yet another extremely airmail story today. Ben Ryder Harrow is here to take us inside the latest news at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. Ben Ryder Howe, who is a frequent contributor to the New York Times and the author of My Korean Deli, Risking It All for Convenience Store. Welcome, Ben.
Hi, nice to be here.
So for decades, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel on Park Avenue was really an epicenter of New York City life. But then 8 years ago, it closed suddenly. Why did it do so?
Well, that's the big question. It had been in decline for a long time and was not the hotel that it had once been. You could get a room at the Waldorf in 2016 for under $300, which is kind of shocking. They had union issues. Like a lot of the old Grand Dames of Manhattan, it was kind of a lumbering, out of shape, dated relic. And it was bought around that time by a Chinese insurer called Anbang, which had gone on a buying spree, had made an attempt to buy Starwood, and had made a name for itself as this very ambitious company with a lot of money and a somewhat mysterious, politically connected CEO. And not long after they bought the Waldorf for almost $2 billion, which is still a record. It's the most expensive hotel transaction in American history. And not long after they bought it, they closed it. And like other Grand Hotels, the Mark, Pierre, Plaza, they said they planned to convert it into condominiums, at least partly. And at that point, people thought it would, take a few years. But that was now 8 years ago.
So is it getting ready to reopen?
It is, supposedly. Hotels are often delayed. Hotel openings are often delayed. It wasn't a big deal at first. They postponed the reopening of the Waldorf. There was COVID. It is an absolutely massive property. And so it wasn't a shock that they took a few extra years, but the renovations dragged on even longer than people expected. There were some questions about whether that had something to do with waiting for union contracts to end or whether there was some turmoil behind the scenes. They went through a number of different management companies. At the same time, they were advertising very aggressively. People could see the renovations happening, but it is now dragged on long enough that it is officially way, way past date. And when they say they're going to open this spring, I think people believe that it's going to happen at some point soon. They're showing the hotel to journalists. And there's been a kind of a mini media blitz, but it's still kind of dragging. I mean, the website has been giving people trouble if you try to take reservations.
So Ben, one of the things, as you note in your story, as Ashley touched on in the beginning, this was the crown jewel. It shows up in stories by F. Scott Fitzgerald. It's legendary in the landscape of people's minds of New York City and glamour. And yet, towards the end, as you say, $300 rooms. And it's sort of like, it's sad it fell apart just as the appetite here was growing for these, as you note, luxury hospitality. The Aman comes to town. All these big hotels start to open here. You've had a little bit of a walk through the new property, right?
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that, because as I'm fascinated, like you said, it's a square block in New York City. Even its ballroom is bigger than most hotel rooms, most hotels, right? So tell us what they've done that we can look forward to that will wow us.
It is an amazing property, and the scale of this renovation really can only be compared to things like Grand Central Terminal, Moynihan Station, the New York Public Library. It's a giant chunk of Midtown. And when you walk inside, it is an experience unlike almost anything else in New York, where you just find yourself going from one big space to another. And eventually you're like, how did they fit so many giant spaces into one building? The ceiling heights are just outrageous, and it's old, and it feels old. And what they've done with the renovation is they've tried to, I think, be very faithful to the Jazz Age aesthetic that they built the hotel with. It's conservative. It's not it's a true, I would say it's a restoration, right? They're trying to bring back what existed. They got Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, which is of course a blue chip firm to do it. But it's not the detail that jumps out at you. It's just how big the rooms are. It was an icon, not just of the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, but, as recently as 10 or 15 years ago, this is where every private school kid in Manhattan went to prom. It was a major stopping point on the cocktail circuit, on the banquet circuit. So, the thing that just kind of surprised me was how quietly or just how readily, I guess, its closure was accepted. There was a time not that long ago when it would have been a much bigger deal, I think. And that's probably a sign of just how much it had declined. The Waldorf has such a large footprint that the rest of the neighborhood really can't do much without it being successful. And that's an amazing thing to say. But the closing of the Waldorf has really held back Midtown East from recovering from the pandemic. If you went back to 2018, you said that this neighborhood would be as blighted as it is, that Midtown East in the 40s would be, this sort of dead zone. It would not have been believable, I don't think. But at this point, not only is there no great bar in the Waldorf or any sense. They have plans for F&B, but it's it's hard to say how that's going to shape up at this point. But there's nothing within blocks. There's nowhere within blocks to go to get a martini, which is again kind of unthinkable.
Well, let's hope they rectify that. But at any rate, it is kind of heartening to know that after 8 long years of looming quietly over Park Avenue, it's about to get a new life. Thank you so much for this great story.
Thanks for having me on.
I'm kind of excited to go back to the Waldorf. They used to have a very good hair salon.
They had everything there. I'm excited, as Ben notes. I mean, it's going to sort of re-anchor Midtown. I don't think I've been there since one of the National Magazine Awards was sometimes in like the late 90s, but ages ago.
But there is something to get excited about, and Christine Mulkey is here to take us inside a retail renaissance that has fashion-loving New Yorkers very excited indeed. Christine is a frequent contributor to Airmail, a former editor at the New York Times and Bon Appetit, and the author of the X-Teen newsletter, one of our personal favorites. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So when we first started talking about Printemps, the French department store that is arriving in New York imminently, you and I got a bit nostalgic for the days of Barney's New York, when shopping and fashion were fun.
So fun. I mean, so fun you could spend an afternoon doing it. I actually just moved to 16th Street, and if I look out the fire escape, I can see the sort of ghost Barney's there, and it makes me sad.
Well, your piece in the issue this week does give us reason to hope. You were one of the first people in to see the new Printemps in Lower Manhattan. What did you find?
I was blown away. I mean, first of all, it's in One Wall Street, which is a landmark building from 1931. Beautiful Art Deco, incredible the detail. And they brought in the interior designer, Laura Gonzalez, and just the level of detail and finish. They didn't just slap some racks on the walls and put down some carpet. Everything is made by craftspeople. It's insane. I was absolutely blown away. It was like I had gone through the looking glass to, Dubai times Seoul meets Japan. It was a truly luxurious experience. It was so over the top, it was fun. And you're also it reminded me, I did a hard hat tour of Hudson Yards before it opened in 2019. And I just remember kind of getting vertigo looking at the marble and, sunken Danish floorboards that they were using. I'm like, don't they know retail's dead?
I mean, you're bringing me back to the days when certainly young women, Michael Haney, asked young men as well who are obsessed with fashion. We would spend all day Saturday at Barney's New York. You would go in the morning, you would check out the jewelry, you would have lunch at Fred's, you'd get that Mark's Madison Avenue salad. It was a wonderful way to spend the day. And I can't remember the last time I've done that. It was probably, in Paris at some point, going to the Bon Marché and having lunch at Petite Lutetia. How has Printemps managed to recreate that experience? I mean, they have restaurants, you said, a champagne bar. Tell us about all that.
Everything. So the Printemps in Paris, for the next time you go, has 15 restaurants, which is just crazy. So they know that food is really important to New Yorkers. It gets us there. It keeps us there. It brings us back at different touch points. So there are 5 ways to go in from a little ground floor cafe where you can get a croissant and a coffee, although it's kind of sneakily a little maybe vegan, but don't tell anybody. There's kind of a raw bar on the second floor where you'll meet for drinks and have some oysters. There's a champagne bar in what they're calling the Salle de Bain because, first of all, you can't call this a department store, apparently. It's like a French pied-à-terre. So every section is named after a room in the house. So in the Salle de Bain, there's also, just like in my Salle de Bain, a champagne bar. And then there's a fine dining restaurant from a wonderful James Beard Award-winning and top chef Gregory Gourdet, who's coming from Portland, Oregon. So you can really just have every kind of food moment, shopping moment that you want. They're very smart on that level.
So I could spend all day there.
You could. I mean, listen, it's not a huge store, and it is very mixed with men's and women's. They're mixing the men's and the women's even on the same rack, and the men's section is pink. They're just trying everything. Yeah, I think you could. You could get a facial.
It's great to hear because in this world, if you're in fashion and retail, all you hear is doom and gloom. It's just, the mergers are happening and, is Saks Neiman's going to survive? What's going to happen with Nordstrom? And so it sounds, everything you're saying is maybe this is kind of where people want to get back in touch and feel and try on and get out from just the shine sort of drop of crap coming into your house and sort of going back to what Ashley's talking about, which is like feeling it, trying it on, and then having a coffee and hanging out with your friends. And maybe this is the future again for us, right?
Yeah, and I think they were smart and that they really made it an experience. You say touch and feel. And I don't even honestly, I've only seen a few of the clothes. They were hanging them up like not frantically, but kind of sculpturally as I was there. You want to touch everything. You want to look at every detail. You want to take a million pictures of yourself in the dressing room because it looks like you're in the Moulin Rouge set. You want to be in the bathroom, which is also, expensively tiled. It's a space that you can discover. And I can't remember the last time we had that really shopping. Everything's gotten so formulaic, so chain, Saks Spice, Bergdorf Spice, whatever. And it's all the same edit. Like, I don't even know that it matters what the clothes are like, honestly. I think it's just going to be really fun to be there.
And on the note of brands, we're so used to all of the French and Italian luxury houses having a big presence at these stores. How is Printemps going to distinguish itself in terms of what they're carrying?
So it's a mix, definitely on the higher end. There are 450 brands, 25% of which are either hard to find in the US or have never been here before. Something as simple as Nukes, we buy it at the pharmacy. I'm wearing the lip balm right now. It's not actually sold anywhere in the US except online. So they'll have that, but they'll also have really high-end labels. There are a lot of labels that we have heard of, like Jacquemus or, Altuzarra or Balenciaga, Marni. But then there's some other smaller ones that maybe you can't quite get as much. One other thing is they seem to think that New Yorkers go to a lot of gala. So there's a whole former wear section, and it has all this vintage Jean-Paul Gaultier, which is cool. And then there's all the jewelry there, and then you can retire to one of these cabines and get your facial and your hair and all of these things done for going out that evening. So I'm not sure who's going down to One Wall Street to then go back to the other one, but it's possible. And maybe they know something about New York that I don't.
Well, I'm officially more excited about Printemps than I was about Bridget Jones' Mad About the Boy, and that's really saying something.
Okay, well, let's make it happen.
Thanks, Christine.
Thank you, too.
There's only one place to discover a global snapshot of the current cultural scene. Airmail's Arts Intel Report. Our international research tool for what to do and where and when to do it is user-friendly, continuously updated, and meticulously curated. Arts Intel is handy at home, on the road, and when you're planning your next trip. It also includes indispensable lists of restaurants and hotels in key cities around the world, recommended by our well-traveled experts. Explore Arts Intel at airmail.news/arts-intel, and be sure to sign up for our Week in Culture newsletter, which is published every Wednesday afternoon at airmail.news/WIC. I'm Chris Garrett, Airmail Deputy Editor, and I never leave home without it. Bon voyage.
Michael, it is the weekend. I know you've got something marvelous to recommend for us. Please.
Now that the Oscars are over and all the big suck is out of the way, I went back and went looking for a couple movies I had overlooked, and I watched one this weekend. Have you seen The Last Showgirl?
It is so funny. I was actually going to go see it in the theater this morning at 10 a.m. And then I decided not to do it because I had too much work to do. But, I'm dying to. Tell me, what did you think?
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, this is a film that came out late last year in the fall, kind of got overlooked. It's directed by Gia Coppola. It stars Pam Anderson, Jamie Lee Curtis, Kieran Shipka, Billy Lord, Dave Bautista. And Brooke and I both thought it was, for all the hype that Demi Moore got for the substance and how brave and transformative the roles, like Pam Anderson in this movie is terrific. She plays a showgirl in Las Vegas at this sort of performance, which is like a vestige from the 50s, 60s Vegas of showgirls and feathers and the whole kind of like Parisian influence as it's sort of entering their last 2 weeks on stage. And it's a really great portrait of a person and a time and a place right now. And her co-stars, I said, Jamie Lee Curtis, Kieran Shipka, all turning great performances. And it's just one of those things like, wow, a good 90-minute movie comes along, good performances. You feel the characters, you know their lives, you know their stories. And, I went back and looked that up later. Pam Anderson was sort of people thought she might get nominated for things. It really made me see her in a whole new light. So it's called The Last Showgirl. It's streaming now at most places on wherever you do your streaming. And you, my dear?
Well, I guess I didn't need to go to the movie theater after all, but the popcorn is better there, so whatever. I have been totally immersed in this show called Running Point on Netflix. It stars Kate Hudson as a girl boss taking over her family's Los Angeles basketball franchise. Michael, have you heard of this?
Yeah, no, it seems like it's roughly based on the story of the Lakers and the Buss family and when Jenny Buss took over, it seems like that. But that's just my impression. I have not seen anything. Is that accurate or true? Or tell me us all about it.
That might track. I mean, I do not pay any attention to basketball unless someone invites me to a Knicks game. By the way, I'm free for the rest of the season. Yeah, that probably tracks. I have no idea. But even if you know nothing about basketball, it's really fun. Kate Hudson is, I think, one of the most likable actresses in Hollywood. And I hate that word likable, and yet it really tracks here. I mean, she's so charming and funny and lighthearted, and the pacing of the show is really great. So she plays a one-time party girl who may or may not have posed for Playboy and was a bit of the black sheep of her basketball family until her older brother runs into a little bit of trouble and she takes over for him. And it was written by Mindy Kaling, Ayat Barinholtz, and Elaine Coe. And these are all very seasoned and accomplished comedy writers. And it really shows. The writing is very snappy. The acting is great. And it's hysterical. So it's on Netflix now. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of feel-good fun. And that's exactly what this show is. So this was recommended to me by Graydon. Graydon, thank you. I love it. My entire family loves it. My daughter has learned a lot of colorful language. It's all good. But you will not... I guarantee you that if you watch it this weekend, you will not hate us. And if you do, then sorry, too bad. There's always Amandaland on BBC. On that note, Michael, we wish you a wonderful weekend. Will you please read us out?
Morning Meeting is produced by Airplay Productions and edited by Jesse Cannon. Our co-editors are Graydon Carter and Al Sanders Stanley. Our chief operating officer is Bill Keenan. And our deputy editors are Ashley Baker, Chris Garrett, Nathan King, Julie Vitale, and Ash Carter. Our CMO is Emily Davis, and our music supervisor is Randall Poster. The theme music is The Cute Monster by the Buddy Collette Quintet. A new edition of Airmail is published every Saturday, so please subscribe and enjoy all of our stories on airmail.news, which we update every day. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airmail Weekly. We will be back here next Saturday with another edition of Morning Meeting. But in the meantime, be sure to subscribe at Spotify or Apple Music. But most of all, thank you again for joining us.